Hello again, everyone. Thanks very much for joining us for Arkansas Weekend. A busy one it was, not just in terms of weather and its economic impact, but some other factors as well cooking around inside the Arkansas Beltway. Doug Thompson joins us, editorial page editor of the Northwest Arkansas newspapers. Price Dooley, political science professor at the University of Central Arkansas, and Jeff Hankins is publisher of Arkansas Business. And thanks to everybody for coming in. Doug, we'll start here because with the state health establishment and all our human services establishment, whether it's Department of Health, whether it's Department of Human Services, it continues to be over the last 40 years. I mean, it's not to justify anything, not to make excuses for anything or anybody, but it is constantly in the headlines.
How bad?
And the feds are again.
Yeah. How bad is it? Well, we've got the director of the state hospital saying in the paper, sometimes we just can't comply with those court orders, so we just delay them till we can, and sometimes we never do, which I thought was remarkable for its candor, if nothing else. We've got the ongoing court and other places fight with the State Department of Human Services, the Human Development Centers, which is for people who have developmental disabilities. We've got and that's all, and there's the continuing simmering bomb of Medicare, Medicaid. All of these things have a common denominator. It's where the federal government has a set of standards and regulations, and where the state government is actually supposed to provide the service, and there's apparently quite a disconnect going on between the two. And to be candid, I think that this presidential administration is a little more concerned about the quality of health and human service care than previous administrations might have been, and are taking a closer look at it. And it is going to be a problem, and quite frankly, it is going to be an expensive problem to fix.
Well, candor's always appreciated, I think, probably. Well, sometimes it probably isn't by management anyway. But it's the things about which one was candid that caught the eye of Mr. Beebe, who doubtless appreciated the candor, but was nonetheless startled, again, at what's the substance of the candor, or the object of the...
People forget that Mike Beebe is a lawyer, and he's a former attorney general. So he is not somebody who is thrilled to find out that court orders have been sort of shuffled aside and such as that. He was, and he has great respect for the courts. You can see that every time he took the school cases. One thing is we've got to stay. Whenever he took up the cause of school funding, said we've got to comply with the law. He takes this sort of thing very seriously. And it should be said these problems have been endemic for decades. And they were there before he got there, and now they're moving off. They're moving to the fore.
Well, as he told us this past week, though, these people do work for me, and that's pretty sure.
Yeah. But there's also, you've got the court orders, but then you have the issue of states trying to interpret federal regulations in terms of what they expect and don't expect regarding federal funding in some cases. I think it's in a lot of cases. I mean, the state bureaucrats spend a lot of time figuring out what federal bureaucrats are thinking and wanting, and I think this is just the tip of the iceberg, because when health care reform kicks in and these state health care exchanges are created, then we're about to add on an entirely different, perhaps even more complex layer when we're trying to figure out what kind of income people have, how much a company is contributing to it, how much an individual is contributing to their health insurance. I think this is just going to be yet another layer, and it's more of the same that has been very difficult, not just for Arkansas, I think for a lot of states to deal with. And again, this is a battle of bureaucracies that takes place. And these court orders, I think some are more straightforward than others, but in this case, there are clearly some things that seem pretty straightforward from orders that have not been followed.
I think it just really illustrates that here in Arkansas we can't even handle the bare minimum as it relates to DHS. I mean, there was this week in the news there was an ongoing allegation of sexual abuse at the state hospital, in addition to some of this litigation that they're failing to go ahead and follow through on. So to me, you're right when you add that additional layer that's coming in 2013 when full implementation of the health care laws come into play. Then I think that the governor has a right to be concerned about that.
I don't think, but at least Arkansas isn't having to come up with well, just as long as candor is the theme of the show, at least we're solvent. Okay, there's a lot of states who are facing similar challenges where they're having to look at having to cut back and being told, no, you're not meeting the minimum services already. So at least once again, being solvent isn't the cure for everything, but it sure helps. But yeah, there's, and I'm going to repeat what I said earlier. I think this administration is taking a much more active, protective, yeah, we really mean it, role on providing state basic services.
And of course, we've got Medicaid that
yeah,
fiscal situation still has, but that's on to
that's
another
going to be
yeah. Let's talk about the weather. More specifically, its aftermath. We're beginning to get some, maybe a better than just bare preliminary estimates, Jeff. But Farm Bureau this past week tossed out $500 million as a figure of possible or likely farm losses. Initial estimates on infrastructure, mostly highways, into the millions of dollars, easily into the millions of dollars.
Yeah, I mean,
at least we got I-40 open again, bro.
Yeah, you know, I mean, I-40 had never been shut down because of flooding. You know, we hear talk about a 100-year flood, and I think that's exactly what we saw here, and what people hope is a once-in-a-100-year kind of situation. But it shut down a lot of commerce in Arkansas in terms of trucking and the distribution system, not just in Arkansas, but through Memphis, which is obviously a major transportation hub. But agriculture, I'm very fearful that it's going to be even more than $500 million. And what's so tough for Arkansas farmers is that there's so much demand for cotton and grain and such right now. Prices are at incredible highs. And while a lot of these farmers ultimately it'll dry out and they'll be able to plant their crops, almost certainly their yields will not be as good as what they would have been. So what could have been just an incredible year for agriculture is absolutely devastated. Now those who were able to salvage crops or you know, and even with those lower yields, they'll still get more dollars than they would have. But the challenge is, you know, you've got 2 weeks of flooding. Now things have to dry out enough to get the tractors in there to even plant fields or to see what they can salvage. But for eastern Arkansas, it's devastating. You've got banks on the hook for loans, just from every direction, and then of course loss of houses. Now the small silver lining, if you will, obviously a lot of properties are insured, so you'll see a lot of reconstruction that will go on and construction, and that will give at least a little boost to the construction economy. But there's no way it'll make up for those kinds of losses. And when we look up even, let's say, Pocahontas, where the Black River flooded, and I mean Walmart, a lot of fast food chains. There were a lot of businesses that took just substantial hits that they really couldn't have imagined. And we're going to be recovering from this for a while.
Your mom's on the Grand Prairie. We hope she was able to stay dry.
She was able to stay dry, definitely. But one thing I think that's overlooked as well is Arkansas River traffic. The river system has been shut down, and it'll be shut down until the end of the month. And so the estimates right now, preliminary, are that they're going to lose at least $10 million relative to that. In addition to the commerce that comes in on the barges. I mean, one barge can basically carry the equivalent of 70 tractor-trailer rigs, right? So from that standpoint, that has a tremendous impact, too, on the local economies here in Arkansas.
That's an extremely good point that I hadn't thought of before. And the other thing about it, when we're talking about the weather and the floods, the cool temperatures that come with it aren't going to help getting anything planted either, even when the floods waters do recede. And on top of all this, and we talk about roads and we talk about bridges, the front line on this thing, the front line infrastructure and all this is levees. And levee boards have struggled for decades. They're financed locally, they're financed by property taxes, which nobody wants to raise. and a absolutely minute fraction of what we've lost structure-wise in this flood, had it been invested in keeping levees in order and getting them put back, would have paid for itself. Would have paid for itself easily. Would have spared us a lot of this damage.
And it looks like I think the Mississippi River levees held up far better than what we saw in terms of what's been done with Black River and
Upstream.
White River. It's upstream.
And tributary,
Mississippi River levees, I think we were quite fortunate how well those, because I think there was a lot of nervousness with those. But certainly much in the way I think New Orleans had to rethink things after Katrina. You know, this is for the Mississippi River Delta area. This is everyone having to take a hard look at what kind of devastation can take place. Memphis was very nervous about things, and obviously even farther upstream, Missouri and such. That I mean, substantial damage.
Right.
Well, there are 100 Arkansas National Guard troops actually deployed down in Lake Village right now in Chico and Shea County, so they really got hit pretty hard relative to that. But I agree with you that the Mississippi River for the most part held up, but those guys down there in Chico and Shea are having a hard time.
But overall, from an economic standpoint, this is going to be a bump in the road for Arkansas's economic recovery from the recession. And, you know, all the trends have been pretty good overall. Yeah. And obviously, you know, I think it's not the delta that frankly drives the Arkansas economy, but it is a big chunk when you start looking from an agriculture standpoint, that it's enough that if we have a fragile rebound, then it matters. Every little thing matters right now.
Yeah. Mr. Beebe told us there earlier this week that he was, frankly, reading his body and more than satisfied with the response of the FEMA anyway, Federal Emergency Management Agency, in light of Arkansas's woes, particularly given the scope of what the agency has had to deal with over the last
nationwide.
That's what I mean. At the same time, though, regarding FEMA, the senior senator from Arkansas is still having a little difficulty getting his colleagues to see things.
And I've read those stories. I simply don't understand that.
It's a little odd. I mean, it seems like he's trying to pass, and we're talking about Senator Pryor. It seems like he's trying to pass legislation that's going to really impact I think it's maximum 4 families, right? But it's one family in particular, and it's like $27,000, and it's really odd. You know, the basic notion of politics is who governs and for what purpose, and I don't really think that this is going to play. This doesn't help him for his next election at all. It's a head scratcher.
It's an issue of justice. I mean, so everybody will know what we're talking about. The one family involved, was it a $27,000 loan that they got to repair flood damage from years ago, and they applied for it, and the FEMA told them they were qualified to go ahead and apply for it, and they went ahead and applied for it, and then years later they come back with a decision, you really shouldn't have got that. We want you to pay it all back in like 60 days. I mean, that's absurd. That's just, I'm sorry, but that's just silly. And it's a simple matter of simple justice that here we obviously have a glitch to get fixed, and we can't get this tiny little glitch fixed. It's a testimony to the paralysis in Washington as much as anything else.
My thought. These little, all of us can recall a time when these things were handled almost as a courtesy to colleagues.
Oh, absolutely.
By the agency. I mean, and I guess that's my overall issue.
I don't think the agency itself wouldn't handle it.
And it doesn't really need to be legislation on the floor of Congress. It could be a rule or regulation promulgated by the agency to go ahead and get that worked out. And so that's why it's a head scratcher for me. He's in my view, he's wasting valuable time in Congress that's going to impact a very, very small number of families when he could actually work through that process to have the agency promulgate a rule to go ahead and get it taken care of.
I don't think. Maybe other people have a different interpretation. I don't think it's reflecting on Pryor's effectiveness. I think it's testimony to how difficult it is to get anything done. If this had been done back in McClellan's day, this wouldn't have taken a week. You know, and then now he can't even get Congress to pay attention to it, or apparently the agency to fix it.
McClellan would have said, I can't find your budget here.
Yeah, that's been over. You know, he had more trouble getting the postmaster in Little Rock to keep his job than he would have had with this thing.
Okay, we've got a couple of state agencies that have been much in the news over the last couple of years. And, of course, we're talking about lottery and game and fish. Jeff, you've got an update on the lottery situation.
Yeah, so we had the Lottery Commission. The Lottery Commission holding a kind of a farewell dinner for one of its members who was not reappointed. And apparently during or after dinner, suddenly they start talking lottery business. One is how the chairman from Batesville had apparently met with the chairman of the Racing Commission and concocted some kind of idea that the Lottery Commission would somehow work with Oaklawn Park, so a state agency working with the privately owned Oaklawn Park. And apparently the media were not notified of this. And you had a Commissioner Joe White of Conway who announced his resignation, apparently outraged because he was told that the media had been notified that more than one commissioner would be at this meeting, and it wasn't the case. And this is a commission that's already under fire, a staff that's already under fire because they don't dot I's and cross T's, audit problems. You go on and on. They don't have, they can't afford slip-ups like this, and a pretty blatant slip-up when you have that many commissioners in the room and suddenly you're starting to talk about business of the lottery. And I think it's my understanding you've got two clear factions within this Lottery Commission. And you've got one faction that is firmly in control and protecting the leadership of that operation. But the word is the morale of that operation is incredibly low. They have had high turnover, and you've got a lot of commissioners who are very frustrated by it. And then you've got others who feel like, hey, everything's rolling along and everything's just okay, and we can meet without notifying the media.
It was not only was a slip up that they couldn't afford, it was so useless. I mean, really, you're going to have a dinner to say goodbye to a departing member? Have a dinner and say goodbye to your parting member. There was absolutely no reason whatsoever to talk shop here. Okay, and then they met for lunch. Then the next day, they meet at lunch to invite the two members, and their inaugural meeting for these two new members is a violation of the state FOI. I mean, come on.
Well, and this has been employed in the past. Hey, informing reporters, hey, we're having a going away dinner for our friend Price. You're invited. And then whatever you hear, fair game.
Yeah.
Not necessarily a formal notification of a formal meeting, but your skirts are clean.
Well, they would be if you hadn't brought up, I mean, I'm sorry, we're talking about Southland and Oaklawn.
There was a lot of...
There's money. There's money.
Of course.
Yes, this is important business, and there was absolutely no reason to bring it up. I realize that the claim is it was just a heads up. Well, the public would have wanted that heads up, too. Got
to move on, game and fish.
Relative to game and fish, I'm going to pass on that one. I'm sorry.
That's all right. Real simple.
Well, you can erase lottery, right in game and fish.
$800,000 over the past 2 fiscal years spent either in excess of contract obligations or with no contract signed yet. I mean, and I love the excuse when the director says, "Well, we don't have software that gives us a warning." Well, I got news. In 1836, when this state became a state, this sort of stuff wasn't acceptable. Okay, the contract says you shall spend that much, and to go in some cases a couple of hundred or even $300,000 above that is unacceptable.
There was no such thing as software in Governor Laney's day either.
Exactly.
And it's several decades subsequent to that.
And I think the strategic problem that the Game and Fish Commission, Craig Campbell's the chairman, and he took some shots at Sheffield Nelson, the former member of the commission. Of course, all the roots of this, you've got Sheffield Nelson, who's been on the outs with the Stevens family. Craig Campbell is married into the Stevens family. You know, there is this whole really old politics and old wars at play here. But they try to, the commission, their response to everything is to try to take shots at Sheffield Nelson, as opposed to stepping up and saying, okay, we didn't do anything wrong and here's why we think we did nothing wrong.
Or we did something wrong and we're going to fix it.
The roots of it seem irrelevant looking at it from the outside.
Well, you can say it's irrelevant, but it's a part of it. It's a part of it,
but the problem is not that two factions couldn't get along. The problem apparently is
some let me put it this way.
Standards.
I don't deny that there's some bad blood here, and there's going to be some bad. But the thing that what the bad blood has done is bring real problems to light. You have to sit around and wonder what kind of problems this agency had when there wasn't somebody stirring the pot.
Yeah. I'm not trying to take away from the real problems that exist. I think I'm talking about the dialogue taking place in terms of the cheap shots at Sheffield Nelson and Sheffield Nelson's cheap shots at Eamon Mahoney and Craig Campbell and those guys. I'm just saying we need some perspective on the kind of back and forth going on there.
Are you implying there might be some ego involved here?
Come on.
Time. We got to get money of another sort. Two tax votes this past week. One of them in your town.
Oh, definitely. There were a couple different things, right? There was a tax rededication here in Conway that failed. Turnout was roughly about 1,000 people, and it failed. 50% of the vote of the people said no. Now, the interesting thing about this is that a few years back there was a bond that was issued to build a new police station here. Because of revenues, this quarter cent is about to be paid off in 2014. And so the city council called a special election to dedicate half of this quarter cent to go for the step increases that have been previously promised to city employees, particularly police and fire. And then another half of this quarter cent to go into the general fund in general. What if nothing was done in 2014, taxes would go down, right? So the people in Conway just didn't want a tax increase in 2014, and I don't think it was actually even
marketed or sold. 1,000 of them didn't.
Well, a majority of 1,000.
Yeah,
but that actually falls squarely on the mayor's office. In fact, in a meeting on May the 3rd, and I don't want to get too deeply into the weeds here, but a meeting on May 3rd when the mayor spoke with city employees. One of the employees commented, why hadn't there not been any more, why hadn't this been in the newspapers? Why weren't people informed? Why hadn't there been a little bit more marketing for it? Yeah. And he didn't want it. He said that we want to get our people out, right? To
under
support
the
it.
radar, right?
And so that others would not. And that's sort of the issue, which I contrast that with Springdale. Yeah. And Springdale, you passed your millage increase that was dedicated strictly for education.
With 44 votes out of 6,000 passed. It'll be the last millage to pass in Springdale anytime in the foreseeable future. Real quickly, it wasn't able to go under the radar like the Conway vote was, but boy, if they could have, they would have. It was a bare bones, gotta have it, must have. This is the absolute minimum we can get by with, and the state's going to kick in 30% of the cost, and it's still only passed by 44 votes. This does not bode well for future tax elections of any variety coming up anytime soon.
It would be difficult to go with a referendum, but the chestnut in Arkansas politics has been that, particularly at any level, if you go to the people and say, all right, we're going to build a fire station, or we're going to raise the salary of these cops, explain, or build a shiny new high school, generally they'll go along with it. I'm not sure that holds.
When you've got a lot of cities in Arkansas, including the capital city, looking hard at asking people to increase the sales tax. So you've got millage tax increases out there that schools still think they need and want. Cities are desperate to come up with more revenue, particularly the capital city. And then you're going to have on the ballot in terms of increase in taxes on gasoline, potentially. I'm not sure how much appetite's going to be out there, and it may be a timing issue on who gets their issues out there first. But at some point, if Little Rock jumps out there with a tax increase and can get it approved, I think it's going to be harder to get people in Little Rock to support other kinds of taxes, whether it be county or any kind of state taxes.
Can't take a referendum on the clock. We're out of time. Gentlemen, thanks to you for coming in. As always, thanks to you for watching. See you next week.
Arkansas Week is made possible in part by the Arkansas Times, keeping you informed by covering people, events, and politics in Arkansas. By FM 89, KUAR in Little Rock, with in-depth news reporting, analysis, and discussion each weekday.